This is a Fox News alert. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump barnstorming the battlegrounds as this wild political season draws to a close. Both campaigns leaving nothing to chance in a final flurry of activity. Happening now, Hillary Clinton just landed in Philadelphia for an event next hour. Secretary Clinton starting her day in Florida before going to Pennsylvania. Those two states alone combining for a whopping 49 electoral votes. Meanwhile, Donald Trump holding a rally in North Carolina, then making a western swing through Nevada and Colorado. This is new Fox polling shows the race tightening even further, with Clinton and Trump separated now by just 2 points nationally. We have live Fox team coverage. Jennifer Griffin is with the Clinton campaign in Philadelphia. But first, we go to chief political correspondent Carl Cameron, who is in Denver, where Donald Trump is holding a rally tonight. Hi, Carl.
Hi, Shannon. The Trump campaign's strategy has long been to focus on 4 key states that they have to win: Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Trump was in Hershey, Pennsylvania last night. This morning, he was in Tampa, Florida. He was also in North Carolina in a subsequent event, but he started the day in Tampa, which is right on the I-4 corridor in Florida, the biggest concentration of voters, very demographically similar to the rest of the country. Whoever wins I-4 corridor in Florida tends to win Florida. Whoever wins Florida tends to win the presidency. And he'll be going to Ohio a number of times before the election day. But in Tampa this morning, he suggested a change of plans. He wasn't going to make a stop in Wisconsin. That's been canceled. Instead, he's going to a state where Democrats have been winning for decades. Listen to this.
We're going to be doing at least 5 of these today. The arenas are all packed all over the country, and we're going into different locations. We're going into what they used to call Democrat strongholds, where we're now either tied or leading. We're going to Minnesota. We're going up to Minnesota, which traditionally has not been Republican at all.
And that has a lot of Republicans scratching their heads, wondering if this is a smart move or whether it's a gamble not worth taking. Minnesota hasn't voted Republican in more than 25 years. And right now, the average of recent polls in Minnesota show that Hillary Clinton has about a 4 or 5 point lead. That's still in the individual polls, that would still be a marginal race. And when you look at all the battleground states and the national numbers, Shannon, essentially every single one shows that these 2 candidates are within the margin of error. And it bears repeating. When we talk about the margin of error, it says the little numbers at the bottom of the screen or in your newspaper, and it says plus/minus. That doesn't mean plus or minus. It means plus and minus. So you can add 3 points to one candidate and take 3 points away from the other and create a much bigger gap. It doesn't necessarily close the gap. A 3.5% margin of error is actually a 7-point spread that can be between the 2 candidates. So it is entirely possible that this race is much tighter than we know from the polls. It's also possible that Hillary Clinton could be further ahead than Trump if the numbers were to be used in the plus or minus against Donald Trump. So going to Minnesota is a gamble. It suggests that they think that they're doing very well in states where Hillary Clinton should be far ahead. If that's the case, all he has to do is make sure he wins Florida. That was a state that Obama won in 2012. Make sure he wins North Carolina. That's a state that Romney won in 2012. He's got to win Ohio. That's one that he has to, that was also Republican. But then there's Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, Hillary has been outside the margin, leading in a number of polls recently. That's a tough piece of ground. So it may be that Trump is deciding, well, perhaps Pennsylvania's slipping away. I'll go give it a shot in Minnesota and Michigan. Shannon?
All right, Carl Cameron on the campaign trail, just days to go, and we'll see if those polls are right or wrong. Thank you, Carl. And there's another big headline this Saturday as WikiLeaks releases yet another round of emails. This latest batch showing the mad dash by Clinton aides to dig her out of the hole created by questions over her family's foundation. Kristen Fisher is in Washington and has more on the very latest revelations. All right, Kristen, what are you finding?
Hey, Shannon, well, we're finding more emails that continue to show that several of Clinton's top aides had serious concerns about conflicts of interest within the Clinton Foundation long before she ever announced that she was running for president. Back in 2011, while Clinton was still Secretary of State, Cheryl Mills sent Clinton campaign chair John Podesta an independent third-party review of the Clinton Foundation, and it found that it worked more like a political operation than a philanthropic one. Quote, the foundation, as opposed to its initiatives, which I have not reviewed, operates more like a political operation focused on immediate situations, tasks, and events, as opposed to a professional, strategic, and sustainable corporation committed to advancing its overall mission. The report then concludes, and I quote, the challenges and deficiencies plaguing the foundation cannot be overstated. They are real and undermine the organization's effectiveness immediately and more long term. So that shows some real foresight on the part of the attorney who put that report together, because fast forward to April of 2015 and Clinton's communications director, Jen Palmieri, is advising Clinton to not make a video defending her family's foundation. And here's why. Quote, I don't think it's a good idea for her to do. There aren't great answers, and in many cases, not her place to answer them. So there you have Clinton's communications director saying that there aren't great answers to questions about conflict of interest or pay to play, and those are the same kinds of questions that are continuing to dog Clinton right up until Election Day. Shannon.
All right, Kristen Fisher live in Washington. Thank you. 2 State Department contractors with decades of hands-on experience devoted to protecting our country's most sensitive secrets are speaking out for the very first time to our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge, about Secretary Clinton's tenure.
Mr. Oyster.
Government contractor Dave Witness says he worked within the State Department's Office of Security Technology, which is responsible for cameras, alarms, and sweeping for bugs. He quickly noticed the rules didn't seem to apply to Secretary Clinton and her team.
State Department was at Oyster. It was great for the foundation and great for the Clintons to be able to have such a great position.
What is the primary target of a foreign intelligence service?
So number one person would be the Secretary of State, their communications, what are their intents, what are their purposes.
As Mrs. Clinton was sworn in as secretary in January 2009, government contractor Emil Smith says he was also working at the department.
State Department rules are clear. I helped write those rules.
Smith says his 30 years of experience includes serving in the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne before becoming a counterintelligence and counterespionage investigator at State, tracking down breaches of classified materials.
I hear things like, well, I forgot. I don't know that I was trained. I don't know this. Every single person that had access to that information when it was sent is in violation.
Smith reviewed some of the FBI witness interviews known as 302s with Fox. They show secure facilities for classified information known as SCIFs were specially built for Secretary Clinton in her Washington, D.C. and Chappaqua, New York homes. Doors that were supposed to be locked were left open.
If you've got an uncleared person in there, it's automatically a compromise.
It says that there were personally owned desktop computers in the secure facilities at Secretary Clinton's homes, yet she told the FBI that she did not have a computer of any kind in these facilities.
If somebody said they're there, then they probably were there, and the reason you would deny it was because you probably didn't have approval.
Witness team handled requests for Mrs. Clinton's devices.
It was unfathomable that it would be used for anything other than just unclassified communication.
You had no idea that there was sensitive information on this BlackBerry, and she wanted to use it for all information.
Correct. We just thought it was for her unclassified use.
But more than 2,100 emails with classified information, another 22 at the top secret level, passed through Clinton's unsecured private server.
What do you think happened at the State Department?
Personally, there had to have been somebody moving classified information from CLAN. CLAN, again, is secret, confidential only, and JWICS. JWICS is where all top secret information is.
After new emails were found in the Anthony Weiner sexting case belonging to his estranged wife, Clinton aide Huma Abedin, the FBI reopened the Clinton email investigation.
We do know that his estranged wife's emails are on that computer.
Whether it's the private email server, whether it's this private laptop, if there's classified, one document on there that's classified, it's a violation. Somebody violated the law. Throw all the politics out the window. What we're talking about is the defense of this nation.
Asked about Smith and Whitna, the State Department emphasized the head of diplomatic security told the FBI Secretary Clinton was, quote, very responsive to security issues.
Well, snapping a selfie with your ballot is no longer banned in Colorado. Federal judge ruling against a law from 1891 when I'm pretty sure they didn't have selfies. That law made displaying your marked ballot illegal. Critics calling the measure, meant as protection against voter fraud, antiquated and a violation of free speech. The judge's ruling means voters will not be prosecuted for posting pictures with their ballots on social media. However, some polling places may still enforce other photography bans. Joyce, by the way, sent us this picture of a 24-year-old first-time Colorado voter taking advantage of the new ruling. Thank you, Joyce, for sending that in. By the way, Fox News invites you to be a part of our election night coverage. If you've voted or you're getting ready to vote, post a picture of yourself where it's legal, your family or your friends on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. All you got to do is use the hashtag Fox News 2016. Show us who you're supporting, tell us why, or you can keep your vote a secret. Just let us know you voted. You could see it all right here on the Fox News channel on election night from our brand new state-of-the-art studio. Democrats and Republicans facing off in court ahead of Election Day. The two big legal battles they are fighting in Arizona and the stakes involved. Plus, the polls tightened in several battleground states in just the last few days of this race. The swing state that right now is anyone's game. Just days before the election, the two major parties are battling it out in court. Democrats in Arizona claiming Republicans are using voter intimidation tactics at the polls, as the battle over collecting early ballots goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Will Carr is live from Los Angeles to explain it all. Hello, Will.
Good evening, Shannon. With the stakes so high, the Supreme Court weighed in this morning on a new controversial law in Arizona that bans ballot harvesting. That's where political groups collect ballots from voters in bulk, and then they turn them in all together. It's an important part of the Get Out the Vote effort by Arizona's Democratic Party, and is particularly effective in minority communities. But the Supreme Court upheld the ban, meaning the bottom line, the new Arizona law will be in effect Tuesday, making ballot harvesting a felony with some minor exceptions. The Arizona Republican Party weighing in, stating ballot harvesting was banned because it threatened the integrity of our elections. The Supreme Court has determined that Arizona voters are entitled to protections that create honest elections. The state's Democratic Party responding, although we are disappointed by the Supreme Court's decision, we will respect their decision. In the final 3 days of this election, the Arizona Democratic Party will continue to follow state law and our voter outreach practices. Also in Arizona, a federal judge has refused to issue an injunction sought by Democrats, which would have ordered Republicans to not take part in voter intimidation. That's in regards to GOP political operative and Trump supporter Roger Stone and his group Stop the Steal. The judge says Democrats did not show enough evidence to prove Republicans are planning to take part in voter intimidation on Tuesday.
The battle for the White House coming down to a very competitive final few days. The latest Real Clear Politics map showing Hillary Clinton's lead has eroded in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. It once looked like it would be a sure thing for her. Now it's rolled a toss-up. Let's bring in Terry Madonna, the director of the Franklin and Marshall College poll and the founder of the Keystone poll. Terry, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Shannon.
All right, we want to start by looking at the Real Clear Politics average in Pennsylvania. Obviously compiles a number of top polls there. It is worth 20 electoral votes, by the way, a key state. It shows Clinton up by 2.5 percentage points as part of the split, part of the average at this point. The Clinton campaign calling out, the big names. She will be there in Philadelphia with the president, first lady, I think on Monday as well. How important and critical is this state to her for winning?
Oh, I think it's extremely, extremely critical. Imagine this. She now leads slightly in Florida. She has a lead in my state, along with Michigan and Virginia and Wisconsin and Minnesota. If she holds on to all of them and loses Ohio and the states that Trump now leads in, she still gets a path to 270. But the critical state could come down to be Florida. If she loses Pennsylvania and Trump were to win Florida and Ohio, then I think he has a path. He has a path to the White House. And what's fascinating is Pennsylvania, for 6 straight elections, has gone for the Democrats. But 4 years ago, Pennsylvania was the 6th closest state. Of course, the top 3 in terms of closeness were Florida, Ohio, and North Carolina. So those 4 states have really been targeted by both campaigns. As you accurately point out, multiple visits. In fact, they might be able to claim Pennsylvania residency if they
pay taxes
hang out
there
in our
next year.
state much longer.
Yeah. Okay, you
that's
talk about the shift there in Pennsylvania. How much of that do you think this time around has to be with Trump's made a very direct appeal to blue-collar workers, to coal miners,
Exactly.
to people who are in manufacturing, those kinds of things, and has emphasized how much their jobs have been hurt by policies over the last 8 years of the Democrats. Do you think that's resonating with them? Is that why he's closed the gap there a little bit?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, that was its initial support base. It's in western Pennsylvania, up in the Northeast, as you accurately point out, where coal was king and steel was king, and all of these huge industries were part of the great industrial era for our country. The jobs have gone away. Trump's biggest support comes from white blue-collar workers, high school educations or less. They are beyond fanatical in favor of him. And conversely, he has to do better with women in the Philadelphia suburbs, where 1 in every 5 voters is cast, where the bulk of college-educated voters live. And it's sort of that back and forth with those groups. Now that the race has gotten closer, he's doing better with women voters. He's losing them. He's doing better with college-educated voters. He's losing them. But he has closed the gap, Shannon, and that's important, particularly in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania.
Okay, you mentioned Florida, so I want to make sure we go through those numbers as well. Again, these are averages, and Mrs. Clinton maintains a 1.2% lead there. All
Correct.
of these are within the margin of error. We have the third-party candidates we continue to list, Gary Johnson and Jill Stein, there. But it seems like the closer we get to people actually having to go into the booth and make a decision, many of them, as we always see, are dropping away from the third parties.
Exactly.
How much do you think that they'll factor into the final results on Election Day in a race this tight?
Yeah, well, look, what we have had throughout the campaign is a larger uncertainty in the election. Not just voters who are saying, well, I haven't made up my mind, but voters who say, yes, I'm going to vote for Trump or I'm going to vote for Clinton, but I could still change my mind. And then you have, as you point out, the third-party candidates, and their support has slipped. Because voters there are saying, well, I better vote for one of the other the two major party candidates, mostly going back to Clinton. That's why she was able to build up a lead about 2 weeks ago. The fact of the matter is that it's still larger than normal. In other words, the volatility is larger than we saw 4 years ago, even 8 years ago. And that difference could be very important in a state like Florida.
Okay, North Carolina, we have a very tight race there. And again, in the averages, Trump is up by 0.8%, so less than a point. That has been a state that it was red more traditionally in recent races, but we've got a really tight re-election race there for Senator Richard Burr, the Republican who's trying to hold on to his seat. He's got a very tough challenge. Any hints that you get as to where North Carolina may go election night? Yeah, well, that's been traditionally a red state. Barack Obama won it in 2008, but of course Mitt Romney won it 4 years ago. I would think Trump, who leads there now, as you point out, narrowly, if his voters there, particularly in the rural parts of the state, are as enthusiastic as some of the polls show, and back in my state in the polls, his voters are more enthusiastic than the Democratic voters are. And the big problem that Clinton has in some states with, a significant African-American population that make a difference. My state is one, North Carolina is one, Florida is one. Obviously, Hispanics very important in Florida as well. The Clinton campaign throughout the country in these key states are very nervous about the enthusiasm of African-American voters. That's why they spent a lot of time, going into the neighborhoods, trying to ratchet up the vote. If it falls back, and by the way, more African Americans voted in our country as a proportion of their population 4 years ago than whites for the first time in American history. So you can see how important that's going to be in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, and a couple of other states. And that enthusiasm means a lot to the outcome of the election in some of these critical states. It absolutely could be. All right, Terry Madonna, thank you so much for your analysis. It's great to see you tonight.
Thank you.
One issue the candidates could not be further apart on: the Iran nuclear deal. Coming up, Brett Baer reports on how President Obama laid the groundwork and the lengths he was willing to go to get that deal done. Plus, an update on the fight to liberate Mosul as Iraqi forces push further into that ISIS stronghold. Iraqi troops moving through eastern Mosul days after entering the city. Special forces now battling ISIS militants with mortars and automatic weapons as they get closer to the densely populated neighborhoods in the city center. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott has more from Erbil, Iraq.
Shannon, fighting against ISIS intensified on several fronts on Saturday in and around Mosul. There were more clashes involving Iraqi forces and militants on the eastern side of the city with casualties. Once again, we witnessed several ambulances rushing the wounded off of the battlefield. ISIS towns were targeted in the south. More reports of civilians being taken as human shields as folks nearby Mosul get ready for even more fighting. Take a look at what we saw and what we heard today.
You're looking at the town of Hamdaniya, about 10 miles outside of Mosul. ISIS was finished here about a week ago. Now there's new activity here, a new mission to train up young and old men from the region to go into the city of Mosul itself and finish off ISIS.
ISIS battered the main church in the mostly Christian town, setting up a target range just outside. Most of the 60,000 residents had already fled, but the battle with ISIS in the area was still hard. 20 security forces died. Local recruits for that militia want revenge. So does Mosul Region Police Chief Watia al-Hamdani. He wants to rid his Mosul hometown and country of ISIS, also called Daesh.
This story finished.
The story is finished.
Story Daesh in Iraq finished.
You think they will be defeated?
Yeah.
Yeah, he said. Yes. As for how long it will take to get rid of ISIS from Mosul, we probably got our most realistic answer from him, and he ought to know. Considering more than 1 million residents still in the city, he said it would take probably 2 to 3 months. Grueling months. By the way, among those residents, his mother and his 3 sisters. Incentive enough to get into the fight. Shannon.
Thank you so much, Greg Palcott. Well, tonight we continue our How We Fight series from the White House. Here's Brett Baer.
The military has undergone a transformation. But another major change is the way America approaches our traditional foes. When he first ran for president, Barack Obama promised he would meet with America's enemies without preconditions.
The notion that somehow not talking to countries is punishment to them, which has been the guiding diplomatic principle of this administration, is ridiculous.
The enemy he was most eager to talk to was the leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
He looked at the Iranians as representing a threat on the national issue of nuclear proliferation.
Ambassador Dennis Ross, who served as a foreign policy advisor to President Obama from 2009 to 2011, counseled the president on his approach to Iran.
We have an early meeting where he wants to try to understand what approaches towards the Iranians could work and what are the prospects of any diplomatic effort working.
It's been reported that almost immediately upon taking office, President Obama began to send secret letters to Iran's leaders. Your thoughts about that?
They did. They began a pen pal relationship early on in President Obama's time.
Republican Congressman Mike Pompeo serves on the House Intelligence Committee.
He was attempting to signal to the Iranians that he was going to be different and allow them to do things they'd not been permitted to do before.
Part of President Obama's approach included apologizing to the regime's supreme leader.
It was very much a message of acknowledging that America had wronged Iran in the past, whether it was supporting the coup in 1953 or supporting the rule of the Shah.
Jay Solomon, the author of The Iran Wars, is the senior foreign affairs correspondent for the Wall Street Journal.
We understand, the U.S. has done bad things to Iran in the past, and we'll acknowledge them. We're not seeking regime change.
How would you describe the Iranian regime that President Obama is set to woo?
A hardline, terrorist, theocratic regime. Intent on protecting not only their own power, but spreading terror around the world. That was the government the President of the United States began to engage.
A regime notorious for killing Americans.
Iran and their militias in Iraq tried to kill me and my soldiers and every other soldier who was on patrol. There's no doubt about that.
Republican Senator Tom Cotton, who was a platoon leader with the 101st Airborne Division in Iraq, now serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee.
They continue to try to kill Americans around the world to this day.
In June of 2009, while the president was making secret overtures to the Islamic regime, Iranians took to the streets to demand democratic reform in what was called the Green Movement.
The Green Revolution in Iran was a huge opportunity for the Iranian people, but also for the United States and its allies.
Neil Ferguson is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution.
Nothing would improve the situation in the Middle East more than regime change in Iran. But when the moment arrived, the president sat on his hands and did nothing.
People were chanting, were crying out so that Obama, are you with us or with them? And asking for his support.
Ali Nazari was among those countless Iranians pleading for the president's help. Some now claim President Obama's desire to achieve that nuclear deal with Iran also played a part in his Syrian policy. In August of 2012, the president warned that country's leader, Bashar al-Assad, against using weapons of mass destruction.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
But when Assad crossed that line, killing nearly 1,500 Syrians with sarin gas, President Obama startled the international community when he did not retaliate militarily.
Foreign ministers, defense ministers, ambassadors, leaders all talked to me about it.
Chuck Hagel was President Obama's Secretary of Defense from 2013 to 2015.
Our allies would ask me, what does the president intend to do if he doesn't fulfill essentially what they saw as a commitment?
President Obama insisted he hadn't blinked.
First of all, I didn't set a red line. The world set a red line.
But it now appears that one of the reasons President Obama did not enforce that red line was because he was afraid of Iran's response.
Jay Solomon in the Wall Street Journal has reported that the reason the ultimatum wasn't followed up on was because there was definitely fear that strikes in Syria could alienate the Iranians and make them walk away from diplomacy. True?
I was no longer in the administration at that point.
But you think it was true?
There's no doubt in my mind that there was a worry that if we did things there, that we didn't know how the Iranians would react.
President Obama, in my opinion, has let Syria burn in no small part because he didn't want to upset the apple cart with his nuclear negotiations with Iran.
It's clear President Obama was willing to go to great lengths to get an agreement with Iran. The question becomes, was it worth it?
And Brett, we'll be back tomorrow with the answer to that question. Tune in for the final installment of our How We Fight series when he anchors special report tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. Ohio's Secretary of State speaking out about the possibility of voter fraud, why he says it's rarer than many people think, and what he plans to do about it if the candidates decide to contest his state's results. Ohio's Secretary of State speaking out about what he will do if Donald Trump questions the results of the election there. John Husted telling Fox News he'd be prepared to take another look at the votes, but he's going to do everything he can to prevent fraud at the polls. Peter Ducey is live in Cleveland with the very latest. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Shannon. Just a few weeks ago, the Republican Secretary of State here in Ohio, John Husted, Donald Trump's talk of a rigged election, even calling it irresponsible. But now it does sound like Secretary Husted is changing his tune a little bit, describing how he sees a theoretical phone call with Donald Trump on election night going if the Republican nominee he wanted to contest Ohio's results because of fraudulent activity.
Well, I would ask him to provide us the evidence, and if there was evidence, we would investigate it and get the answer to that. But I would say that to any voter who called me with evidence that something went wrong.
Secretary Husted also told us that voter fraud does exist, but he describes it as rare, even though hundreds of cases are turned over to prosecutors every 4 years. Officials we've spoken to say that so far there have been reports of fraud this year, but nothing has panned out, and that the most common call they get is from an early voter who shows up in person to cast a ballot and is shocked that nobody checked their ID. But because in-person ballots in Ohio still get mailed in, the rules are the same as if your ballot is filled out at your kitchen table. No ID necessary, no laws broken for not showing one. With 3 days left until the actual election day, more than 1 million Ohioans have already cast ballots. It sounds like a lot, but we're told that's about 18% less than this time last year and 4 years ago. Shannon?
All right, Peter Doocy live in that battleground state of Ohio. Thank you. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are focusing on that battleground state with just 3 days left until the election. According to the Real Clear Politics average of polls, Trump holds a slight lead of a little more than 3 points. The Buckeye State is vitally important to Trump, as no Republican nominee has ever gone on to win the White House without it. Joining me now, Jay Shabria, a former senior advisor to Ohio Governor John Kasich and managing director for the Mercury Company. Jay, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
What is going to make the difference in the Buckeye State? We talked a little bit about Pennsylvania, about how manufacturing, blue collar, coal workers, those were things that Trump had made a very direct appeal to. Does some of that translate across the border in Ohio as well?
Well, it absolutely does. Pennsylvania and Ohio share a lot in common. What's really remarkable about this race, first of all, it's all about turnout right now at this point. Everything's about turnout, and that's why you're seeing Hillary's having concerts with Jay-Z and Beyonce, and she's campaigning with LeBron James in Cleveland tomorrow. So it's all about turnout. What's really interesting about Ohio is that traditional Democrat places like Youngstown and Toledo may go Republican or stronger Republican than they have in the past, because those are the issues that Donald Trump speaks to. But areas that are traditionally solidly Republican, places like Delaware County, that is a collar county of Columbus, will likely vote less Republican and more Democrat, because they've got a lot of college-educated white women. And that's going to be the thing that throws everything out here in kind of turmoil, because no one really knows what's going to happen, because we don't know where the votes are coming from.
I read some accounts just a couple of days ago that the African-American early vote is down in Ohio, that it had been at lower levels than it was. The last couple of election cycles, down closer to, what we saw during President Bush 43's second term, his re-election. How much could that matter in Ohio?
Oh, it matters a great deal, and that's been the shocking thing to me, to see that the Hillary campaign has not done a good enough job turning out the African-American vote. Sure, they've got the concerts with Beyonce, they've got the concerts with Jay-Z, and they got LeBron James tomorrow, but Cuyahoga County is way down from where it was before. That's where Cleveland is. But I will say this, I was told today that Franklin County, which is where Columbus is, another big urban county, is they're just having a tremendous turnout today. There were 750 voters an hour going through those centers. So that's a place where Hillary's going to look and say they're turning out the vote.
Absolutely. Now, when we talk about enthusiasm, though, hers has been dropping off. When you look at it nationally in the polling, it shows that his has been up, hers has been down. We always talk about these national numbers, but of course, that the Electoral College and state by state is what matters. It sounds like, they're leveraging the enthusiasm where they need to, or at least trying to. Is that something you've been able to measure at all there in Ohio?
Look, if you had told me a week ago if you had asked me who was going to win Ohio, I would have said Hillary Clinton, absolutely. When the FBI story came out, you could absolutely see her enthusiasm dip. There was no doubt about it, and I think that alarm bells went off in Hillary Clinton's campaign office. Now, I will say this. They are doing everything they can, and they're heavily targeting the state. They're doing everything they can to turn out the vote. And what doesn't make sense to me is why Donald Trump is not going to be in Ohio, a state that he has to have our 18 electoral votes. He's spending time now in a place like Minnesota, which if he wins Minnesota, it's going to be a landslide election for Republicans. Let's be clear here. That's likely not going to happen. So for him not to be in the Buckeye State, but Hillary being here over and over again, that might make a difference.
Yeah,
and
what
that's
do you
where
make of that trip to Minnesota? I mean, he and his campaign have been talking about picking off blue states.
Yeah.
I mean, he needs to hold GOP states and those that are leading GOP. He's got to pick up toss-up states as well. What do you make of the strategy about Minnesota?
Malpractice. I'm going to tell you, it's malpractice. If Donald Trump loses this election, and if he loses it by just losing Ohio, He should not be saying this is a rigged election. It is bad campaign practice. You do not go into places where you're not going to win in the last days. The most important thing for a campaign is allocation of their resources, and the most important resource is the candidate's time itself. And for him to be in a place like Minnesota, it's just silly, and that's the only way you can describe it. Silly.
Well, Ohio is critical to either of these candidates. It's got to be at least one of the main linchpins of winning. Jay Shabria, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
If Hillary Clinton emerges victorious on Tuesday, she might not be enjoying any kind of honeymoon period at all on Capitol Hill. Republicans are already talking about toppling a Clinton presidency and whether that's even appropriate with the election still up in the air. With the election still undecided, Republicans are already throwing down the gauntlet against a potential Clinton presidency. A number of GOP lawmakers vowing to challenge Clinton at every turn. That includes blocking her Supreme Court nominations, opening up new investigations against her. Some are even using the word impeachment. Let's bring in Susan Ferricchio, chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. All right, Susan, it sounds like one way or another, if she wins, it's not going to be dull.
It does. What the important thing to do, though, Shannon, is try to figure out how much of this is campaign talk and how much of it is going to be reality if she wins the White House and the Congress remains Republican, say. For instance, for impeachment, you hear a lot of talk about that on the campaign trail. It rallies the base. It certainly excites Republicans. But impeachment was never really a great thing for Republicans when it came to Bill Clinton. They launched impeachment hearings, and he was eventually impeached, and it hurt them politically. They lost seats in that midterm election when they were supposed to actually pick up seats. So it was not considered something helpful, and it's not something I think that a lot of the leadership in the GOP want to do. It's probably more the base. The Supreme Court, though, that's a whole nother matter because we're not just talking about replacing any Supreme Court justice. This will swing the court. And so it really does raise the question of how far Republicans are willing to go. Will they really try to leave that seat empty until there's a Republican in the White House? Or are they going to feel pressure? Because this would be really hasn't happened in modern history. It did happen many, many, many years ago where they leave this vacancy for a really long time on the Supreme Court. And so there will be pressure on Republicans to really consider those two options.
Yeah. And to that point, we have a number of GOP senators now making these hints or suggestions that they would block any nominee and that they would keep the seat open. A couple of them who've been talking that way are in, tough re-election battles. And so we would expect that maybe it's part of the campaign talk. But on the other side of the aisle, we have vice presidential nominee, the Democrat Tim Kaine, himself a senator, now starting to talk about the nuclear option, which they did with these lower court judges. They haven't done it for the Supreme Court, but essentially would change the Senate rules so that you only need 51 votes to actually move a nominee forward. He's starting to talk about the fact that they may actually consider that. So if they pick up 5 seats and take control of the Senate, that could be a very real option, and that could get ugly.
That's right. It could, and it would get ugly. Republicans would consider that a real threat. I think they feel like that is coming down the pike. But, of course, first, Democrats have to win the majority. And second, they need to consider what will happen in the future. 2018, which I hate to say, everyone is going to start thinking about on Capitol Hill on November 9th. 2018 looks much better for Republicans in the Senate. They could easily be back in the majority with that very rule empowering them. Democrats know that. And so it's really going to be a tough thing, a decision for Majority Leader Charles Schumer, who's likely to take that role if Democrats win. It's going to be a tough decision for either party. The Supreme Court issue is probably the #1 issue if Hillary Clinton wins the White House, how that's going to work itself out in Congress. We very well could have a vacancy if Republicans are in power.
It's true. Now, let's talk about the fact that there are a number of investigations that are still ongoing. I talked to a House Judiciary Chair, Bob Goodlatte, about this. Those aren't going away. I mean, there's some that involve the FBI, some that are, about the email, some that are about the Clinton Foundation. But there are others that deal with, there could be House committees subpoenaing a sitting president. They're not going to make it easy for her.
No, they're not. And I do not expect these investigations to go away just because she becomes president. But I do think Republicans are going to be careful because they don't want to push it to the level of impeachment. I know everybody's talking about that, but there are long memories here in Washington, and impeaching Bill Clinton did not do any favors for the Republican Party. They don't even want to take up the impeachment resolution for the IRS chief, who is very unpopular. I think that will be a real tough move for them, and there may be some pushback from the leadership, but keeping the investigations going and furthering the shining the light on what was going on with the Clinton Foundation, all of this is likely for the Republican Party because they don't want to put her, they want to weaken her basically as a president so that it's harder for her to run for re-election, and so it strengthens the Republican Party and weakens the Democrats, and that's what it's all going to be about if Clinton is in the White House and if Republicans are running the House.
We will see. We'll know a lot more, hopefully, this time next week. Susan Friccio, great to see you.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.
You too.
Thank you so much for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for Special Report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Much more coming up. Fox Report Weekend with Harris Faulkner is coming up. But keep in mind, we've got special election coverage all throughout today, next week, and right through until we know exactly what happens. We have got hours and hours, 67 hours straight. We're going to be bringing you election coverage. And part of that includes our social media coverage. So listen, if you're out there and you are taking a picture of your ballot, only where it's legal, if you're self-voting, if you're taking your kids, your pets, people have sent us pet pictures. They shouldn't be voting. But whatever you're doing to get out to the polls, whatever's happening in your neighborhood, let us know. Just use the hashtag FoxNews2016 on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. And we'll continue using your pictures on air and on Tuesday night, our nonstop election coverage. You may see yourself there as well.